Now, one question: we were trying to decide whether we're going to bring the gifts with us on the cruise and do Christmas on the boat, or wait till we get back. What are you doing?
So we've done what you've done. So my kids are older now. It's more like, what type of technology will you be purchasing for me? But I think, when we had younger kids, we would always go and just do it when we got back. We'd bring one or two things and then have Christmas when we got back.
I think I'm going to bring the stockings and like a couple of gifts. But you're right. And with what are you getting me? My son wanted a frying pan. He is was his first time living off campus, his first time living away from home, and he realizes now that the food doesn't magically appear on the table.
That was what he really wanted. He wants a frying pan. Did I hear that right?
He said, "You're not buying me toys, are you?" And I said, "Son, you're 19. I'm not buying you toys." He has autism, so he's pretty direct in everything he does. So he said, "I want only practical gifts." So I can you be more specific? So I'm starting as what my dad did with me is he gave me that set of tools, that are good tools that'll last you forever. So I got him, his first screwdriver set and his pliers and his, just starting to build his normal toolkit that he'll need for day to day.
Oh, well, it's God, it's crazy busy time of year, isn't it? All the extra stuff we have to do and buy and get ready for. So, what day do you leave?
We leave on the boat leaves on Monday, so we're leaving out of here probably Saturday evening because we got to haul ourselves all the way down to Orlando.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, 8 hours in the car.
Well, yeah, we're nervous about the travel. I I don't like to fly to begin with, so.
And you'll be in the plane for a good amount of time, right?
Yeah, probably like 7 days, I think, is about. No, it's not. It's like 14 hours. It's to the
Hell.
first, 8 to the first stop, 6 to the second stop.
And how old are your kids?
12 and 13.
That's a long time to sit a 13-year-old boy down.
Yeah, well, they're two girls.
Oh.
I know it's funny because Amanda was saying, "Oh, I don't know if we're going to be able to sit together," and I just keep thinking, like, who cares? Like, sit together to do what? We're going to be together for 12 days. Like, I don't need to sit with anybody on a plane. I don't like to fly, and I just want to watch a movie and go to sleep.
So what kids with autism usually have sort of narrow bands of interest, and one of my sons is airplanes. He can look outside of one plane and tell you what the other plane is based on where the wings are and the number of windows and the engine and gas and all this stuff. So we were on a plane and my son was a couple rows back. And I asked the guy if he could switch seats so that I could sit with him. And the man said, "I'm not changing my seat. This is fine." And I said, "Okay." And he sat down and Tucker opened his mouth and talked for the next 90 minutes about planes. And about halfway through the flight, I looked back and the guy just went, "Well played."
Oh, that's good. That's funny. Well, is Craybill on the call yet?
Looking through our little list of people.
He's
I don't see
joining
her.
right now.
I don't see her on here yet.
I'm here. Stephanie is here.
Oh, she just came in.
Yep.
I don't see her.
All right. All
Sorry.
right.
Sorry, guys. I was finishing up on another important email. I mean, Zoom call. So I apologize for signing in late.
All right. Miss Joy, are we streaming? Are we ready to go?
We are ready.
Okay. At this time, it is 9:03 on Wednesday, December 14th, 2021, and I will go ahead and call
Sure, it's Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, not a problem.
Tuesday, December 14th. I will go ahead and call this meeting of the new Hanover County Board of Education Policy Committee to order. I will call the roll. Ms. Craybill?
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Wildebohr?
Present.
And I am here. A quorum is present. The second item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes. First, I wanted to welcome Jean Hall, our assistant principal from NC Papa, who is joining us, AP at Gregory. So thank you, Jean, for attending. Second thing was I had a question of why does our agenda mean that we have to go through the policies in the order that they were presented to us? Because I'm just wondering, why are we skipping around so much and not going in order?
So some of these policy updates are policies that we discussed at the September meeting, and revisions have been made. And then with regards to the updates themselves, we were not able to finish some of the 8,000 series.
Oh, no, those I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the ones in the 7,000s, because if you look at our, maybe mine was different than everybody else's, but mine don't go in numerical order at all.
Yeah.
So, did you find that too?
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, I think they're going in the order of the first policy that's listed. So like
That's correct.
7220 is also 1510. So I think that's why that one is first.
Yeah, so is there a reason why, oh, wait a minute, hold on, this is Jean Hall. I don't think she's on. Hello? Hey. No, it's not face-to-face, it's on Zoom. Where are you? Okay, that'll be good. Okay, thanks, bye. Okay, so Jean is at the Board of Education Center, but she will be joining us in a minute. No, and the reason I was asking that, Dr. Barnes, is because like 7,100, I didn't see that as a new. I saw that as a new policy, but that's not in my packet at all.
We did 7,100 early. We did that. We jumped it ahead so I could get the fingerprinting in. So we did that for first reading last board meeting.
Okay, all right, because normally in the correlation table, McKenna puts, we've already reviewed this one, so I'm not sending it to you again. And she didn't write that. So then I was confused that maybe we have to do it again. So, all right, that explains that. Thank you. That was just a point of order. I'm fine in going with whatever order we need to in order to get them done.
Okay. So there is a motion and a second. Ms. Crable, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Wildebohr, how do you vote?
Aye.
All right, I vote aye as well. Agenda is approved as is. Next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes. I hope everybody had an opportunity to look at the minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve the minutes as presented.
All right, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Well,
I'll second. I'll second. Any discussion? Okay, minutes are approved.
No, we have to vote on it. No, we have to vote. All we just did was do motions.
Ms. Crable, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Wildebohr, how do you vote?
Yes.
I vote yes. Minutes are approved. The next item on our agenda are policy updates. For anybody watching or anybody else on this call, these policies are policies that we have previously discussed that needed some more revision. That revision has been done and they are ready for review and further discussion. So with that, we will begin with the first policy on the list, policy 6430, purchasing requirements for equipment, materials, and supplies. And who wants to take this? Is Mr. Anderson on the call?
I'll take it. This is Mary Hazel.
Okay. Thank you, Mary Hazel. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm excellent.
This policy was discussed, but we needed to incorporate the micro purchase language, which is now on page 7. And that was previously approved in a resolution. And so we needed to incorporate it in the policy. So we're just bringing it back with that language that the board has previously approved.
And I had a question on this one. And just to throw it out there, why are the numbers that are set at those levels? Why is it 90,000, 30,000? Is it just an arbitrary number we've
For the
decided?
micro purchase or for the actual policy?
Well, like for the actual policy, like formal bids equal to or more than 90,000. Why is it
most of it? I'll let Colin speak to this if he wants, but most of this is based on state law.
Okay, that makes sense.
I mostly track state law.
Yes, it's general statutes.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense then.
Okay, I had nothing on this policy. Ms. Crable, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I did actually. So the title of the policy, purchasing requirements for equipment, materials, and supplies. As we're looking through a couple of the next ones coming up, the services is included in some, but services is not included in others. So I was just trying to figure out, what if we wanted to be uniform or not, because it refers to them, like maybe coming to the next.
It's fine if it was just purchasing requirements. I don't think you have to list them.
Well,
No. Like in the title where it says, like on 6510, it says, equipment, materials, and supplies, services taken out. But then when we talk about it in the body of the policy, it says supply services. So I didn't know if that was important, that we were the same in all of those. So it sounds like it's not really that important.
the difference, Ms. Craybill, is that services are not subject to the state law bidding requirements. So there's
Okay.
just different rules around. They're not bidding laws for services. That's why, in policy 6430, it's only for equipment, materials, and supplies, and services is not included.
And so that's why we have the policy 6450 that says purchase of services as a separate policy.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So then the other thing I just wanted to, kind of get straight is the purchasing director. That's not you, Mary Hazel, right? That's somebody else.
That's Mr. Lee here on the call, Kevin Lee.
Oh, hello, Mr. Lee. Yes. So, all right. So he's got a title. Then in the, if you look on page 2, under A2, in that paragraph, the last sentence, it doesn't say purchasing officer, it says purchase officer. So that's just basically a typo.
Where is it? Under reverse auction?
It's under A2. It's under, is that what A is? No, A is formal bid. It's on page 2. Formal bids equal to or more than 90,000. You go to the next page and it has reverse auction, duh. It's the last sentence. To conduct a reverse auction, the purchase director.
Director.
Oh, see, I see
Instead
it.
of purchasing. And in every other
Purchasing.
place, it says purchasing.
Yeah, we can fix that.
Other than that, other than those questions, I'm fine.
Okay, so I will go ahead and make a note to move this policy on for first reading with changes. That'd be policy 6430 on for first reading with the approved changes. The next policy on our agenda would be policy 6450, purchase of services. Ms. Small?
So I think this was also discussed previously, and there was some debate about consideration. I think Mr. Anderson had suggested raising that level for which we do an RFP from 100,000 to 300,000, but we discussed it with Dr. Faust, and we're going to keep it at 100. So there's really no change from the last time you saw this.
So I'm
Just a
going to bring
question,
up.
is this, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Pete. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask, is this so under this policy, this is how we extended the Suffolk Solution contract for a couple more years? Is that correct?
This is about how you would make choices in terms of like when you have to do a more formal purchasing of services. This isn't, I think that was a lower dollar amount that would have been approved. And Dr. Faust or Dr. Smith, you can help me. I don't remember the dollar amount, but I don't think it went through an RFQ because it was under this amount.
Yes, I keep telling the board I did not approve Sofix Solutions. It doesn't make my office because it was too low of a salary. It was 25, so the committee was able to make that.
Which, okay,
That was a-
it's kind of
that
off
was
topic.
the EDI committee approved that. They asked Dr. Smith when they met with them in August. They talked about the scope of work. That's why I sent that to the board so everyone could see that the committee was aware that they were going into another year of service. We also talked about they could get out of the contract. Every one of the contracts have at least a 30-day notice that they can get out of them. And the EDI committee chose not to get out of the committee. Chose not to get out of that contract.
Okay, well, that to me is a separate discussion point than the policy, so, right?
But just as an example of a dollar amount for any contracted services under 100, this is the policy that would determine how we make those the purchasing process for those.
Gotcha. So I had this question the last time that we went around. In the blue in paragraph number 2, where it lists all the terms and conditions, I don't see anywhere that we are asking them for proof of insurance, and if they are going to be a service contractor, a service provider with actual people in our facilities, where they have to provide a record of their safety performance.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that state law that if we enter into a contract, don't they have to be bonded?
So our standard contracts do include all those requirements. Colin, help me here, but we didn't have them in the policy.
I don't think we need to list all the contractual requirements out in policy itself, but our service contracts that we recommend the district use do include those requirements. And the bonding requirements apply to certain types of contracts, construction contracts, but in particular, service wouldn't require a service provider to be bonded necessarily. But our standard contract does have an insurance provision.
Okay, so I was more concerned about just basic insurance requirements, and since it didn't say will establish, such things as or including but not limited to, it pretty much the way it reads to me is that this is what's supposed to be in there, and I didn't see proof of insurance as something we were asking for. So that, and we specifically asked for that in legal services. So that's why I'm just wondering why we wouldn't include that as just a standard something in our language.
Well, I think that there are a lot of things that we include in the service contract, like indemnity required. We ask for companies to indemnify us, and I just don't think we need to list out every single thing that we have in the contract here. I think we could say, we could add language so it says service contracts will include, at least, or some kind of language like that, so it's clear that's not all it includes.
Okay. Can we do that? Because it says in the second sentence, service provider, or the second line, service provider data such as, but it lists a lot, in there, a lot of important things. So if we can just add a word or two that makes it sound like including but not limited to.
Got it. Okay.
Is that
right
okay?
after including but not limited to?
Yeah, something like that, just so that we know that we're clear that there are other things that we're looking for. So that's all I had on that one.
Okay, so if there's nothing else, I will go ahead and move policy 6450 on for first reading with revisions.
Yes.
Okay. Our next policy for discussion will be organization of equipment, materials, and supply services, policy 6510.
Well, services has been struck, so that's not in there, and organization has been struck.
The
Right.
organization of equipment, materials, and supply services, or supplies,
No services, right?
supplies.
We're
Yeah.
actually consolidating 3 different policies, which was 60 or proposed policies, 6510, 6520, and 6521 that you looked at before. And so once again, it's not new language, it's just a consolidation, adding paragraphs D and E.
Okay. And so, Mary Hazel, I thought that when we talked about these before, if we look down in letter D, the last sentence where it says the superintendent or building level supervisor shall establish procedures or rules for allowing individual or organizations to take such items, especially those of significant value, off school premises. I thought we decided that we weren't allowing that.
I think that was about other organizations, but for example, we might, this is a really bad example because I don't know the dollar amount, but maybe, the band's taking equipment when they go, out of town or whatever. So I think this reads to our use of allowing individuals or organizations. Oh, I see what you're saying. This is the other group. This isn't us. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that may need to be struck. I don't know how I missed that. So we did, let me find my original copy.
But if you're talking, if you want this to mean like the band taking off that, then we should say individuals or school organizations. But individuals to me can mean,
I don't.
employees.
I think I was reading it wrong. I don't think it's necessary to say that because we obviously can use our equipment where we are for school business. So
Where we want, right.
I think that if it is not our intent to let other organizations use the property, then we should remove that sentence.
Well, I was just clarifying because I thought we had a pretty lengthy discussion about not letting our stuff go off, to other people.
Yeah, I would agree because I think I've seen in situations where then it becomes a real pain to try to get them to give us our money back or to to at least pony up some of the money that if something is damaged. So yeah, I think maybe just lending things out wouldn't be the smartest thing to do.
Clearly, we do. I think part of the discussion was, we are assigning equipment to students, but they're still
Right.
part of the school system. So I think this is probably meaning other folks.
Right.
So-
That's how I'm reading it, but
Okay.
maybe I'm reading
Got
it
it.
wrong.
We'll take it off.
Okay. That last sentence take off.
Yes, ma'am. Does everybody agree?
Yeah,
Anybody else?
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so then moving on to letter E, where we're talking about the board controls equipment, materials, and supplies. When it talks about school personnel and students may not employ such items for personal use unless the following things are met. I had a note to myself on the personal use of supplies, like consumable supplies. Are we allowing that, like take home paper, or take home, I don't know, like extra workbooks? I mean,
No, not personal use. I think that occasionally what this is probably intended to mean is, we will, allow an occasional personal email, I guess, on our equipment kind of thing. So I need senior staff to jump in here and help me with some examples. So, it's up to the board whether you allow that, but I think sometimes, sometimes during the day, someone might, use a computer for personal use. Maybe they shouldn't, and maybe we shouldn't have it in policy, but I think that's happened. I think actually our technology policy allows it. I don't know if Dawn's on.
Yeah, I'm on. I'm sorry. Yes. So our technology policy does say that, email can be used for, occasionally for personal, because stuff comes up, but I don't think our policy says the equipment necessarily, but I imagine people do check their personal email with the devices we provide for them.
Yeah. And I really wasn't thinking about those because I know that we talked about that at length under your domain, Dawn. I was just looking at was thinking, since we were talking about supplies, I was thinking about what supplies might people take home for personal use.
Yeah,
And all
and
I
that
could
wouldn't be
think
allowed.
about
So
was,
I'm thinking if it's covered in Dawn's policy or in the technology policy, does it need to be here and we could remove this one? Unless someone could give me some other examples from a school that I can't think of.
yeah, I wish Jean, I don't think, Jean, are you on yet?
Yeah, I'm here.
right.
I would say what comes to mind most would be like copier paper. I mean, I'll use that as an example,
Yeah.
something that's kind of easily transported out of the building that people might have use of in their home setting. Other than that, I can't really think of anything.
That's basically what I was thinking of, like consumables, like paper. And since we've had some people already complain that we are out of paper, at some schools, then we probably should not be allowing people to take home paper, unless perhaps they're printing off something at home that they're working on. And maybe that's just too much hair splitting, but I'm just thinking of basically our consumables.
But that wouldn't be personal use. So, I kind of
that's right.
agree
That's
with
not
you
personal use.
with the supply language in there. Either take off supplies or eliminate it completely.
So, I mean, things that have come up, I know, because I know I've had people ask me, my church is doing something. Can I borrow a data projector and use it, for maybe we're doing a celebration or whatever? And my response has been no, because then there's that risk involved with it. So there's that kind of things, if people, and I guess in maintenance and us, I know I don't allow equipment to go home as far as tools or ladders or whatever for people to use for personal use. So we don't allow any of that.
I agree. And so our procedures don't allow it, but the policy does. So maybe remove it.
Yeah, I just think we need to be clear on, personal use, and maybe we say it on a case by case that the principal or you have to check it out, but then you run the risk of, well, principal A is letting me take this home and principal B is not, or, Dawn says yes, but somebody else says no, so that's, it's probably better just to not allow personal use.
And for insurance purposes, it wouldn't follow if it was taken off campus for personal use, it wouldn't be insured. So,
yeah. And so that would say will not enter school system or the life of the product, so we're already going, against what we said. So Colin, do you know why that was added in by chance?
It was another policy that was proposed. It wasn't in our current policy.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we don't have this now.
Okay. So why don't we just strike that paragraph out? Is that acceptable?
Yep, I'm good with that.
Okay.
Yep. Done.
All right, so if there's nothing else, we will put 6510 on organization policy for first reading with the amendments. The committee reviewed and discussed policies 7360 and 8225 at its November 9th meeting. Research.
Now, so
can you hear me?
You said. No, you went out for about a couple seconds.
I'm sorry. The committee reviewed and discussed policies 7360 and 8225, as well as 8340 at its November 9th, 2021 board meeting. Research and the revisions have been made with regards to these policies, and they are ready for further review or discussion. So with that, we will begin with policy 7360.
So for this one, we already had a rather detailed procedure on crowdfunding, and we went through the proposed policy, and we being Nancy Braswell. Thank you, Nancy. I think you're on. And she made suggestions to sort of bring this in line, with our current practice, which is as restrictive as what was proposed, but not we took out some of the language that encouraged it, because this is not something we really want to encourage. We certainly allow it, but the other one, it was a little too, it's a, I hate to say, it's a lot of trouble. Crowdfunding is a lot of trouble. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but it ends up taking a lot of time, and there's risk involved. And so we want it to sort of strike a balance between allowability and then proper controls. And so I don't know if you want us to go section by section, or if everybody's read it, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the changes that you made, because it really just, kind of really, the last one, you're right, was like, it was crowdfunding was our go-to, method of fundraising, instead of, not last resort, but, last resort. But I had a question on page 1, letter A, in the first paragraph, and it's in new wording that we put in from their supervisor. And I'm wondering if we want to say principal/supervisor, because we have done that in a number of other policies, where we're talking about principals or supervisor or building admin people.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, later on in the policy talks about it being principal, so
It
makes
does
sense.
say that, yes, right. So that,
Yeah.
so we were just a little inconsistent. So I wanted to confirm which we were going to use.
Yeah. And we were just sort of pulling this from what we had written before that wasn't aligned with policy. So thank you for that. Well, one thing I forgot to mention, if we could go up to the top of the page, Nancy and I had a discussion right before the meeting started. And one of the things we took out that we didn't really mean to take out, which it says, for the purpose of this policy, crowdfunding is an internet-based request to raise funds. And say in the line we deleted, it talked about in-kind. So we want to add back to raise funds or in-kind donations, and then keep going, because we don't want to lose the in-kind donations portion of this. And it was sort of accidentally struck when we struck the rest of that sentence.
So
Okay. Put that back in.
to us what you wanted to say, Mary Hazel.
After funds, insert
Wait, after what funds?
or in-kind donation.
So for the purposes of this policy, crowdfunding is an internet-based request to raise funds for specific purposes for a school or school system. Then what?
So it was before that, to raise funds, it'd be to raise funds or in-kind donations for specific purpose. Yes.
Okay.
And it also aligns to the language that is in on page 5, as we talk about some of the procedures, in-kind funds were listed. So
okay.
I had a question on the second section of A, and I don't know whether we need to be that specific or not, but it says, clearly in the new writing, without pre-approval, but it doesn't say, and I think that the paragraph before talks about the supervisor, but do we want to say it again, or is it just repetitive then?
I think what we just, the point here is, because this is initiate and participate. So the first paragraph is more about initiating. Let's see. Let me read it again.
Like I say, I'm just asking the question.
So this is more about on behalf of the school system. So just to make sure that we don't do anything or participate in any other crowdfunding campaigns, or sort of do them outside of the school system and then say it's a school system, is what we're trying to get at. So you certainly could add that approval language again, but I think this paragraph was more about when people might do it on their own to get donations for us using our name. And that's happened before.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's fine if they do it on their own name, but anything tied to the school system we were concerned about.
And then it shows up on Francis Weller's, let's promote this across the county page, report. And it had, all right. So my next comment we're going to see this throughout the rest, where in letter B, it says approval request form. But throughout it says fundraising form, request form. So what do we need to pick one that we're going to call it?
We do have a New Hanover County Schools fundraising form, and we want to use that exact form to also approve crowdfunding, is what we're trying to say.
Okay.
So if we need to shift the language, we certainly can.
Like if you look at, let's see, so in the title there where it says approval request form, so that's the first time I read it, no big deal. fundraising form, no big deal. That just seemed like I wasn't certain if that fundraising form was the same as the crowdfunding approval form. But if you look down in like on page 3, the very top, the first sentence where it says, to be eligible for approval under this policy, employees must submit in writing a fully completed fundraising approval form. And then we've struck out request form. And then you look farther down, the first line in number 2.
Oh, sure. What paragraph are you in now?
Oh, I was at it's C1, the first paragraph, but it's on page 3, where we're calling it a fundraising approval form, and
Okay.
we've struck out request form.
Okay,
And
so I
then-
think we were trying to strike out wherever it said request form, but we missed one. So I believe that if you change the title of B to approval request, like just how you do it, or approval request process, maybe.
Yeah, so
you might
maybe
wanna change
maybe that's what's confusing me. That
So
approval.
section 2 is about how you do it. And so approval request process. And then if you go
That's-
down to the last sentence, if we could page up, please. If you go down to the last sentence below number 7 and replace approval request form with the NHCS fundraising form. I think that takes care of all of it.
Okay, so the title for letter B should be approval request process,
But I'm open to suggestions.
huh?
That works for me, but I'm open to suggestions if anybody else wants to.
Well, if we're calling it an approval request form, is that the same as the New Hanover County Schools fundraising request
We
form?
have an existing form and we want them to use the same one. That's what we're trying to say.
All right, so let's call whatever you're calling it, then we should go through the whole thing here and call it the same thing in every location.
Right, that's what we're trying to do. I just don't think that we need to name the form in the title of section B. I think we just
Right.
need to say approval request process.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Okay. And we'll look for more and make sure we didn't miss any, but we'll fix the ones that were
Okay.
wrong.
And then, and throughout that, you're going to see the principal / supervisor, that,
Yes.
that sometimes we call it that and sometimes we don't.
Okay.
So, all right, so now we're in to section C1 and farther down that paragraph where it's talking about we are allowed to seek money up to $5,000. But when I was reading in the correlation table, it mentioned something that we were doing this because we wanted it to match other the 8220 gifts and requests, and it says $500. So I didn't know if maybe that was too many zeros or I'm
No.
just confusing two things.
What we were trying to do, just in terms of recommendation, was to tie it to our grant approval process, which is these amounts. At what
5,000?
level things have to approve. So that's the reason we chose these dollar amounts. I'm not. I'll have to look up that other policy you referenced.
Well, no, it was the policy gifts, and because it says in her notes that in section C, the board is encouraged to make the amounts designated in this section consistent with the amounts designated in policy 8220 gifts and bequests. And it says that the principal has the authority to approve crowdfunding campaigns that seek less than $500. So that's what I was just wondering.
Under gifts and bequests, the change we made, we changed that to 1,000, I thought, and that was previously approved.
Okay, all right.
And that is more about just not necessarily going through this process when it's approved, but if there's just a gift given to the school, they have to come in to let me know so I can make sure it's something that's properly budgeted in school funds. It doesn't need for other reasons to be budgeted centrally. So I think that's slightly different, where one is a proactive fundraising effort and one is somebody might just give you something.
Okay.
So I think that's 1,000, and then this one, we're going to give them the authority to approve at the same level we do for grants.
Okay, that's fine. I was just, I was just reading McKenna's notes.
And if you want to change the other one back to 5, we can, but I think that one's already gone through.
No, I don't mind having 1,000. I
Okay.
was just thinking that the 5,000 was a typo, that we added too many zeros, and I wanted to just.
Thank you
get
for that. You're very, very careful with catching all my little
Well, just
oversight.
well, it's I got fat fingers, and when I'm typing too, and I can easily, type in my Venmo that I'm, giving somebody $2,000 by accident because I thought I put
Well,
it.
anytime you want to do that for us,
Yeah. Okay, so I have a note on for what's B7. Oh, so on page 4 under item number 7, where it says including we cannot include pictures of students, and we've struck that out on page 2, number 7. So are we striking it out in one place because it's better off in another place? Is that why we did that? It's on B7, old 7 was struck out, that we have to get permission.
Yeah, I thought we had it 2 places, and that's why we struck that one.
Okay, all right.
It was already covered in.
Yeah. Okay, just making sure.
Yes.
And then, and me, I have to bring this up on the number. Well, I don't know what the number is now because it goes from 8, 9, 12, 11, 12, where it talks about the food.
It should be 11. Yes.
Yeah. It should be 11. Oh, that's what that. Oh, the 11's down at the bottom there. Okay.
There was just a space in there. We'll fix it.
Okay. The policy 6140 is still one of those ones sitting out there that we haven't finished yet. But I know everybody says it's okay to approve policies that we don't have, but I just wanted to make sure. And so moving on to page 5, letter E, approved crowdfunding sites. We eliminated that whole paragraph. McKenna's notes said that we don't have to remove that, but gave a whole bunch of sources on why we might want to have a list. So was there a thought process in keeping a list?
Once again, in the effort to not encourage and not help facilitate them using this, I don't personally feel comfortable deciding which sites for them to use.
Okay, so I'm good with
that's
that.
Why it's not, if the board wants us to do it, we certainly can do it, but it's not something I had on my to-do list. So, and we don't currently do it.
Let's just say a school picks one, and principal approves it, and then when we get rolling, it turns out that, oh wow, that might not have been a good site to pick.
Well, we certainly through procedure could say don't use that one anymore because we know that there's been a problem with it, as opposed to proactively saying here's the ones we want you to use.
Okay, because we don't want.
I think we'd be okay in that situation.
Okay, that's cool. So the last thing was in letter E, where we call the chief financial officer, struck out school financial officer, school finance officer. I know we had a big discussion last time on what we're calling you. And so are we calling your office chief financial officer, or are we calling you school finance officer?
I think the decision was to go with school finance officer as it was in the law, and we just missed that one.
Okay.
Isn't that what we decided, Colin?
That's right.
That's what I thought.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. No need, because we talked about it like a million times. And then another thing that kind of bothered me was the last sentence of E, second paragraph, where it says the school system reserves the right to transfer donations to a different use at the board's discretion. When crowdfunding money, people who give donations expect their money to be used for what they donated to. So I was just wondering why we put that in.
This was once again what was proposed. We didn't put it in, we just didn't take it out. But I think that there may be a situation where the purpose for, and this has happened just in life, the purpose for which something was donated is not something the school system does any longer, and we have to repurpose. Maybe money was given for a club and the club dissolved, but I think we have other procedures that address that. So I don't know that this line needs to be in policy.
Because I'm just thinking that if I'm donating to a crowdfunding campaign, it's usually something that is ongoing. And so there should be no reason for us not to be able to use it for that.
And I need other people who've actually done this to join in, but an example I can think of that relates to crowdfunding is maybe they were trying to raise $1,000 to do a thing and they raised $5,000, and they already did the thing with $1,000 and then, have some discretion over how to use the rest. But I don't, I've never actually done it. So I don't know that I have great examples.
I do have an example.
Okay.
When Gregory was the science and technology school, they raised money for lab tables, and then we made it into a Spanish immersion program. So we took the lab tables and put them in another school for science and technology.
What it becomes school, like if equipment is purchased and it becomes school system equipment, and that it does say that somewhere, the board certainly inherently has the right to decide, or a school could close, right. And so I think it gives you flexibility. You already have that flexibility. So I kind of defer to Colin whether or not it needs to be in here to allow us to do it. I think we already have that authority.
I agree.
Okay. So maybe take it out if you just don't like the sound of it, but we still have the ability.
Well, and I think, we've talked a lot about transparency, and if it's in policy and it says this is what we do, I don't think we need to necessarily cross through it and say, well, we have it somewhere else, so we can, I'd say leave it in there. If we were going to do that, why cross through it? And
it wouldn't be done unless the thing that it was donated for is no longer possible. It's not like it wouldn't be done just because, we don't really want to do that anymore. So is there some better language to make it?
Yeah, a question that I have, because to me, the way it reads is, because when you're doing crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, people are giving money for a cause. So the donation really is the money. And to read this, you have the right to transfer donations to a different use. Some people may read it, because the way I'm reading it is the board has the right to change that money for a different use other than what was intended in the application. And I don't think that's what we mean.
Okay, I just made this up as Dawn was talking. Tell me if it's terrible. The school system reserves the right to transfer donations to a different purpose if the donated purpose was achieved.
I think that's better.
That's better.
Yep. Because that says very clearly. Yeah, that's very clear.
Because what came to my mind was in the past when like education lottery dollars that were supposed to go to schools got repurposed by the General Assembly to something else. And because they needed it. And so I know that we're not on that level at all, but I do know that with parent support organizations, if a parent gives money for a certain thing and it is not put into that account or spent on that thing, those parents get really upset.
Right. And we do have in our, more detailed procedures for schools, in accounting for school level funds, that we always have to keep the documentation of a donation and use it for that purpose. I mean, it generally, if something gets repurposed, it sort of comes to my level before it does, Okay.
All right. Well, I like the wording that you suggested. I think that makes it more clear.
Okay.
All right. If there's nothing else, then we will go ahead and put 7360 on for first reading with amended changes.
Correct.
Yes.
Lovely. Our next policy for review is policy 8340, insurance.
So we had just begun discussing this one when we kind of came to the end of the last meeting. There was some discussion that we had about whether or not to keep the social worker language in there. We don't currently do it. But the thought was if in the future, the, student support services decided there was a need for that, we certainly would require the insurance. So I don't really know where we left that paragraph.
Yeah, I couldn't remember either. And then I was reading McKenna's notes and it said, you can decide if you want to leave it in or not, but it said alternatively, Oh crap, I lost my place. The social, the board could expand this to apply to any employee who was required to transport students in his or own personal vehicle within the
But
course of work duties, but I thought we didn't do that either.
we don't allow it. We have that other process that we talked about where maybe if we have a taxi, maybe a staff member would ride with the student, but we wouldn't do it in our own vehicles currently. But I can't speak to the future. So I think if it were to change, then maybe we'd come back and change the policy if you want to take it out.
No,
But
I don't mind leaving it in because social workers, I mean, that's, part of their job, really kind of is to sometimes help in that capacity. But I just want to make sure that they're covered, if we ask them to do that.
Yeah, my only concern is that it might be read by them that we are asking them to do that, and we're not. So, Julie, can you help me here?
Yeah, we really look to use other opportunities for transportation of students and families, whether we need to use a contract for taxi or something like that. But in emergency situations, we're generally able to find other ways around them transporting in their own vehicle.
Okay, so should we leave it or not leave it?
I don't think we should encourage it.
Yeah, I think we should take it out.
Yeah, so that follows Mary Hazel's thought process on crowdfunding. Let's take away anything that gives the impression that we are thinking this is good.
Yep.
I agree completely.
Okay.
And then maybe fix that finance officer to school finance officer.
Yes.
And then otherwise this one's fine.
Yeah, in there it does say finance officer, there. It doesn't say chief.
So we need to insert school.
Oh yeah, school finance, right, it's school.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so after we insert school and take out that paragraph, is there anything else? Lovely. We will move policy 8340 on for first reading with the changes as amended. The committee reviewed and discussed policy 9120, bidding for construction work, at its October 12th, 2021 board meeting, or committee meeting. Revisions have been made to this policy and is now ready for further review and discussion. Ms. Hazel Small.
This one's not, I think I can do this one, but Eddie, is Eddie on? This is one that he was working on.
Yes, I just got on.
Welcome, Mr. Anderson. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Sorry, I was a little late.
No, don't worry about it. So we're discussing policy 9120, bidding for construction work. Do you want us to skip forward and we can just come back to that one after this one?
No, I think there were two changes here. There's a gender identity that we added, and then if you'll scroll down, there was one other change that right there.
Letter E.
Yes. That
Second
last
paragraph.
paragraph there, we had asked the attorney to look into that and see if there was a legal requirement for that for board approval if the contract extended into the next fiscal year. And she had responded back that there wasn't. I think Mary Hazel and
yes, Deborah had emailed me, and we had this in our old policy. It was always something that we thought was required, but I read the act again like 6 times, and it really did not require that. So I think there are some situations, I mean, you have to make sure the money is available, but that sort of covered other places. So into the, if the board approves it, I don't know that we need that language. So Colin, did she talk to you about that discussion?
I saw her in the email correspondence.
Okay.
yeah, and this is dealing with construction work. And so it's rare that we have these projects that are more than 300,000 that are actually funded out of our local operating budget. They're typically a Fund 4 capital budget, which rolls over automatically.
But I think this exact conversation is gonna come up again when we get to one of the other purchasing policies. So it's just some language we had that was a maybe misinterpretation of the law previously. So I still can't see it on there. I know what you're talking about, Eddie, but what line are we on?
Right at the very top of the page. I mean, at the top of the screen, right after 300,000.
Okay, you'd already marked through it. I was looking for something that wasn't marked through. Okay, got it.
So the only question that I had on this, I mean, everything else looked good because we had talked about it before, was in letter A, the first line where it says all contracts formally or informally bid will be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. But then in section F on page 3, that last sentence where it says the records will document why the selected contractor was the lowest responsible bidder. So I didn't know if that word responsive needed to be in both places.
I think it does. The general statutes are very consistent in using both. The bidder has to be responsive, meaning that they submitted the bid on time. They provided all the correct information, documentation, filled out the form correctly, and then responsible is a history. Are they capable of doing the project? Do they have the financial resources and manpower? What's their history of performance on similar projects? So the general statutes always refer to both of those. So I would recommend adding responsive up into A.
Okay.
Okay, is there anything else on this policy?
No, that was it.
Okay, well, I'm good with it. Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for joining us and for your work with us. I'm sure we'll speak again. If there is nothing else, I think we should move policy 9120 on for first.
Okay, I'm sorry. Never mind. Sorry. Shut up.
Yeah, 9120. Yep.
Yep.
9120 on for first reading with the changes made by our attorney and staff. All right, so moving on to the next item on our agenda, the policy updates from the North Carolina School Boards Association. Due to time constraints, we could not finish our agenda at the last meeting, so we will pick up where we left off with policy 8341, limited claim settlement. And I guess we will begin with you, Ms. Small.
Yes, this was we didn't have this policy currently, so this is new, and I don't have any recommended changes.
Okay, committee members?
None.
Didn't see anything.
Gasp. None.
Yay! Yay!
Yeah.
I'm putting it down in my journal.
Yeah.
All right. All right. We will chalk that one up to a Christmas miracle. And we will move on. We will move on to policy 8350, fixed assets inventory. 8341 will be on for first reading with no changes.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I just had a question. Just knowing the extended livelihood of a mobile classroom, I'm wondering, it's the useful life. It says 20 here, and buses are 10. I'm kind of wondering why 20. I don't see many of them lasting that long.
Eddie, I think we have some that are like 50 years old, don't we? But this is more what the standard is. We certainly use things longer. This is what we'd appreciate over.
Okay.
But certainly we're not getting rid of them just because they hit that mark. Eddie, would you agree?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and I remember at one point, I think I may have aged out, but I remember that there were mobiles that were older than me, but I think you got rid of those and I got older. So for the capital assets inventory, just thinking about it in this moment, I would like to consider the title change, because this is more about defining our capital asset limits. And, it does mention inventory, but you might want to just name it capital assets. But that is completely up to the board. Most everything in here was pulled from our current policy, and there aren't any recommended changes in amount. So I'll take any question.
I just have one question. How come we took out the definitions? Because those, to me, sort of helped me understand a little bit on what you were talking about in there. So how come we struck the definitions?
We struck the definite, we were just making it how it was in our current policy. We certainly can go back and, you know, if you think it's helpful, we can have those definitions in there. We don't disagree with those definitions. The only thing, let me look. The other thing that isn't addressed in this policy, before I answer your question, is that we actually inventory more than our capital assets. These are the ones we depreciate, and we do inventory these, of course, but we also inventory items, which we actually refer to as inventory, between that $1,000 and $5,000 mark, and all technology, which wasn't addressed in our old policy. So if you want those things to be addressed, you know, about what our inventory practice is for all equipment, we certainly can add that as well. These are the definitions more for, you know, capitalization purposes, but I don't disagree with those definitions. And so if you, that last one, if you, for equipment, we certainly, I don't know that we would need to actually put a dollar amount on it. I was thinking we put a dollar amount, but you wouldn't have to. So this just defines those things. So you can keep those in if you'd like.
I think it'd be better to keep the definitions in myself.
Yeah, and then so in that first line where it says, for purposes of accounting and inventorying fixed assets, we should call that capital assets. Right, to go along with the title of the policy.
I would say for the purpose of accounting for capital assets. Because with these particular definitions, I mean, it doesn't really get into the inventory process. So I think it's a little confusing. So I would just say for the purpose of accounting for capital assets. And capital assets and fixed assets are, the difference is they're all fixed assets, but the capital means what we're going to capitalize. And so we're trying to do two things with the same policy, and it gets a little confusing. So we do inventory all of the fixed assets. And Ashley, I think you're on. If you can help me dig out of this hole, I would appreciate it. But
So do you think that we need to have like maybe call the policy fixed and capital assets, and then under, and maybe make a letter C that talks about the inventorying process, or a letter D that talks about that, because you've already got record keeping?
I guess what I was trying to say is they're all fixed assets. Some of them are capitalized. And so when you say and, it makes like it's two different things. So I would prefer this policy address capitalized assets, because we do need we are required to have a capital policy for the board to determine these limits, which is what the purpose of this policy is. Our inventory procedures are something different. And I would just, I think it should say that we should have an inventory control system, which is in the first paragraph, but I don't think we need to get into the specifics of it.
Okay, that's fine. Fine with me. I mean, whatever you recommend.
I think if we just change the title of capital assets, fix that paragraph right under the chart to say for the purpose of accounting for capital assets, and leave the definitions, we'll be good.
Okay, good with me.
I'm fine with that. Mr. Wildebohr?
Yes, sir.
All right. Is there anything else with policy 8350? With that, I will move policy 8350 on for first reading with the changes. Our next policy up for discussion is policy 8410, individual school accounts. And I'll start with our staff as usual.
So for this one, it says board authorized the maintenance of appropriate. Oh, can you hear me?
Somebody's blowing her nose.
For appropriate individual school accounts, I was going to say as determined by the school finance officer. You don't really need but we do have a manual that goes through the details of all this. So I thought there should be some reference to our procedure, but it's not necessary.
I had a question about what volunteers are allowed to handle school checks, receipts, deposits, money, or financial records?
They're not. I missed that.
Yes, let's just strike them out. We don't need them doing that.
Well, I will say that might not be true, but they're not volunteers. We do have people who we do hire game workers, but we hire them.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of school systems, the gates are handled by volunteers, but not here.
Okay.
I missed it.
For volunteers.
And then in the fourth paragraph, make it the school finance officer.
Got it.
All right, are we good with those changes?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Policy 8410, individual school accounts, will go on for first reading with changes and amendments. Our next policy up for discussion is the school finance officer policy, policy 8510.
Just make sure we go through and call the school finance officer, the school finance officer, every place that we have it.
Yeah, one thing we just thought about earlier when we saw this, because everywhere else in policy it probably should say school finance officer, but because my title's different, do you want to right here say with the title of just this one place in policy so it's clear that it's the same position? But
yeah, I don't mind doing that because I think some people if they were to go and read this as a layperson, they would think of a school finance officer as the person we call a school treasurer.
Right. So that's my only recommended change here to, at the end of the first sentence, say with the title of chief financial officer.
Okay.
Agreed.
I'm good with that.
Yep. We'll change that. 8510.
All right. Did anybody have anything else on this policy?
I don't know why I put it on number 16. I put a square around that. I'm trying to think why. Where it says receiving and accounting for all clear proceeds of fines, penalties, and forfeitures, and notifying the superintendent of board of such funds. How I can see how you notify, the superintendent, because that's just part of a reporting process, but how would the board be notified that these funds were received?
So the way I do it, and it's probably not quite as strong as the language here, is that because they come in bits and pieces all during the year, we budget those funds. So when you budget it, you're notified. If
Okay.
you would like a report, we certainly can do that.
Well, now I don't want to make more work. I'm just
This was
wondering-
standard language. I don't know that, clearly the budget of the funds will cover it. But if you want to.
Well, if that's where it is, I'm fine with that. I just didn't know if that meant, because we have so many policies that we've read back through that I think we're going to have to probably create some sort of checklist that said the board will be notified at quarterly or monthly or what. It's like, there's a lot of board notifying that I don't recall us getting, other than maybe, through other ways.
I would prefer then, if you're okay with the budget covering that intent, that we get rid of that last phrase and just end with forfeitures. Because certainly that's covered in the budget process. But if you want to report, we can leave it in. But if you're going to say notifying, we probably need to give you a monthly report.
Or whatever the report is, quarterly, or, even calling it out at the end of the year. Pete and Nelson, weigh in. I just want to know if I'm supposed to be expecting to hear that.
Yeah, we usually get information on it, but yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't really know how to answer that.
Yeah, one
And I
of the
think,
things that we do is we budget it, we estimate how much is going to come in and we budget that. And so if you get a report, I don't want it to look like, oh, and this is money that we can do something else with, because we will have already budgeted it in advance. So it's certainly fine to report it if you want, but I just want to be clear that it's not going to be, it's already going to have a purpose.
well, yeah, but I think it is always good to, if we're supposed to be in charge, responsible for it,
Absolutely.
good to know about it.
So I can do it. We're doing the purchasing ones monthly. We can just do it at the same time.
Awesome.
I
Thank you.
think, honestly, I think something like that should probably just go on our consent agenda and, hopefully everybody's doing their work and looking at that. I don't really think it needs to be a public presentation about it, because as we've seen, I think that can lead to some misinformation about money that we have and what we might be able to do with it. So that would be my recommendation, is if we could just have that in a consent agenda, that would be fine.
And just to clarify for me, so any of the reports that are required in policy, they do need to go on the consent agenda, because some of the reports we had just shared with the board, but the consent agenda makes it public. So is that, just want to make sure I'm doing that right, because this is a new process.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with that. Is there a line item in the budget that says fines, penalties, forfeitures?
Yes, it's a revenue line item. Mhm.
Okay. So if anybody wants to go back and look at it,
Yeah,
they can.
absolutely.
But if you want to just put that in with all the other things that you do as consent items, I'm good with that.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions about 8510, we will move 8510 on for first reading with the changes. Our next policy up for discussion is policy 8520, school treasurer. And I'll begin with staff.
I think in line number 2, and in the last sentence, we're going to want to put school in front of finance officer.
Yep.
Starting to pay attention now.
Yay.
And some school systems call this bookkeeper, but we don't. We use the term treasurer. So I think the language is fine.
So in the first little paragraph where it says to serve as school treasurer at each school that handles special funds, what does that mean?
The school bank account.
So do we need to call it special funds, or do we need to call it school funds? Because special to me implies that you've got something going on.
I think school funds will be more understood.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's in the law. Colin, do you know? I can go I can go to 448 real quick.
I don't know. That's not familiar to me. I can look up the statute, the reference.
I'm almost there. Y'all can keep going, but if I'll let you know at the end if we need to. Right now, I'm going to make a note to just say school funds unless it's in the law.
I think that sounds clear, so we all know what we're talking about.
I agree that it sounds clear. My only concern is that aren't they all technically school funds?
It is special funds of individual schools in the law.
Well, let's write that down. Special funds of individual schools.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's much better. I did not have anything on this policy. I don't know about any of my fellow board members, but I was fine with that language.
And I will say, I just wanted to I'm trying to look and see if Chris is on the call, but the way that we've always done the appointment, because the law does require that you appoint the treasurer, is just through the normal hiring process. But if we were to have, I guess an interim situation, we'd have to do a special appointment. So it's on the personnel list. It's not anything different than with all employees. It's just with this particular one, the board has to do it, but they have to do it for all. So I think the language is in here to meet the requirements of 115C 448, but we don't handle it any differently than we do other employees. And just want to make sure the board was okay with that.
Yeah, I didn't even pick up on that. I just assumed appointment hire.
It's a little bit unique situation. If there was a situation where a school didn't have a secretary, a really tiny school, and then anybody in the school could be appointed treasurer. It's an office, kind of like finance officer. So I think it's just different language, but we just treat it like we do all other hires.
It is one of our only jobs where they have a proficiency exam that we give them to make sure that they are skilled in the area before they take the job.
Thank you.
Okay, well then, if there is nothing else, policy 8520 will go on for first reading with the changes recommended. Our next policy for discussion is policy 8530, fidelity bonds.
Don't have any changes for this one.
Letter A, school finance officer.
Ah, you're good.
Was there anything else, Mr. Wildebohr, Ms. Crable?
No, I had nothing. 5:30.
Ms. Crable?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay, policy 8530 will go on for first reading with that one change. Let's see, our next policy for discussion, we will be moving forward now into 1510-4200-7270, school safety. This is an interesting one.
Yeah, good
Who
morning.
wants to take us through this one?
Sorry, I'll take the lead on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes.
In the first paragraph, we thought that the last sentence should read, every school must ensure the following safety measures are met. Implemented seemed like a vague term to us, so we thought to change it to that language instead.
Read that again for me, Chris.
Every school, the last sentence, instead of that, every school must ensure the following safety measures are met.
Okay.
In the first paragraph under A, it says throughout school hours twice in that paragraph, or it says school hours and then it talks about field trips, etc. We thought that should read throughout school sponsored events rather than just school hours, because some of our school events that do require supervision happen outside of school hours.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that, but I also think we need to say something about before school. When the students are on our campus, I think we need to be able to say, even before school officially starts, we need to be able to supervise them.
So my recommendation would be that first paragraph or the first sentence under A. This supervision must occur throughout school-sponsored events, including before school, during class, between classes, etc. And then after field trips, add other school-sponsored events as well.
Very good.
Mr. Shive, did you make a note of that? I like that language.
Yeah, I concur. 100%. Well done.
Yeah, I shared the Mr. Wildebohr's concern about before school, because some schools, they do have, I can see teachers out there, but other schools, there aren't teachers where students gather.
And some schools, I've seen a 0 period before where kids will come in prior to school starting, those sorts of things. Before school would cover that. If we can go to the second page, please, page 2 of 5. I just want to reference this whole section right here.
What's right here? I didn't see it.
I'm sorry, the section 1, responding to student altercations and other threats to safety. There is one change we'd like to make, and then I want to make sure I reference something in particular that's become a current issue with folks. If you look in the second paragraph, it lists several types of employees. We would just like to say all school system employees with responsibility for supervising students, because that really broadens that term to mean everyone.
Yes, I would leave in because my first thought was sometimes substitute teachers get lumped in as employees, but people forget that they're really employees. But if we take out coach, we do have some coaches that are not paid. So should we leave them in volunteer coaches?
Well, I would think that they still fall into the regulation of responsibility for supervising students, even if they're not being paid.
Well, your change was all school system employees with responsibility for supervising
Good
students.
point.
That's the only reason I brought that up.
I think you might, all school system employees and volunteers with responsibility for supervising students.
Yes, that's fine.
Yes.
Because you may have a
and
volunteer in the cafeteria, that's covering lunches or something.
yes, ma'am. In the last paragraph of section 1, we wanted to throw our favorite or designee after the superintendent, please.
Yes, and so I had that same thought process and was wondering if, since this is a school safety policy, do we want to call out, like we've done in other policies, do we want to call out the director of safety or the executive director of safety and security? Because would that not be the next best designee?
Not in this case, not for an altercation in a school building.
Okay.
I think also leaving the superintendent or designee, that gives him the flexibility to choose a designee based on certain circumstances.
Okay.
I guess the pivot point I want to make sure is clear, and this may take some better training and understanding on the part of employees. Recently, as we've been talking with employees are expressing concern about when they have to intervene in a fight and when they don't. And so I wanted to highlight that this policy specifically speaks to that. In the middle paragraph, it talks about using appropriate student behavior management techniques. And then in the next paragraph, it talks about for minor threats or altercations. If you can look at that third paragraph, please. Midway down, it says for minor threats or altercations involving young children, employees shall intervene directly to end the fight and address the safety threat if the employee can do so safely. And then it says the employee who encounters a situation that cannot be managed safely and effectively by that employee immediately should request assistance. So I think training our staff to understand that determination of whether they can manage that safely or effectively is individualized based on the person involving themselves in the altercation. Meaning a football coach may feel a certain level of threat intervening while a librarian may not. So I think that's a piece that we'll need to train folks on. I don't think the policy anywhere mandates that people intervene physically in altercations, but I think that's a point that we want to make sure of in this policy, that it does talk about their responsibility for student safety. It does not maintain that they have to intervene physically.
Dr. Barnes, I would like to support what you're suggesting, because there is, I think, a pervasive belief across the district in maybe some buildings more than others, but that if you have not been CPI trained, therefore you are to remain hands off. And that is not true. That is not the case. And so I think the wording here really holds everyone who is responsible for intervening when necessary.
And I've seen countless times that your relationship with students ends a fight rather than intervening physically. And so there are lots of ways to intervene that don't involve physicality. And I think that's going to be a training point we need to work with our staff on.
So is there a definition of young children? Does that mean elementary? Does that mean elementary middle? Or are we talking young children, everybody in our K through 12 system?
Right. Where does young stop? Good point. As I get older, that young seems to get older.
It moves far, far away.
It does not specify. I would think that means K2 for sure, K5 depending on the situation. Because of course, I've seen fifth graders that are as big as eighth graders, and I've seen eighth graders that are the size of fifth graders.
Right.
So
that's why I was asking the question. Is it age or size?
I think that's a question for Colin when they give the adjective of young, because I could say that my daughters are young. I would hate for my child to be, and I say this for anyone's child, to be getting brutally assaulted and no one does anything or intervenes by saying, stop fighting, clearing the scene, doing anything. I think that would be a hard one to sell if you're saying, oh, well, it says young children. and you stood there and watched someone got the crap beat out of them. So I think that would be one where, and not saying that we have to, again, physically move people, but there are things that as adults we can do. And again, you know, do we do the same thing? And I'll just let Colin, what's the definition, or what is the state saying when it says, or the definition of involving young children?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's anything that's pulled from a statute. I think that, I mean, you could just remove young.
I think, Colin, I would think that this speaks to a theory of cognition rather than size or age. Does that make sense? That young children may not have the cognitive ability to manage behavior, manage their own emotions, that sort of thing. But that is vague.
I would almost rather see it taken out and just say, for minor threats or altercations, when we have altercations in there twice, for minor threats or altercations, the employee shall intervene, if they feel like they can do it safely.
Yeah. Shall intervene directly to end the fight or address the safety threat, right? It doesn't say exactly how they have to do it.
We're always thinking the worst, like this big guy and these two big guys who are fighting, or these two big girls, but it can be as little as, it only takes someone hitting someone's head on the concrete in the right position, and, the rest is history for them. And it doesn't have to be, you have high school girls and some boys who are, 90 pounds. So I just want us to be able to say that we have intervened, and that if we're going back to supervision, what does supervision look like? If we're really going to get that technical in it. Because you can't say you want them there first thing in the morning supervising kids, but when this comes, it was a young child fighting.
Yeah, and I think that helping with that training of what active supervision is, and being involved in the environment, I think is key. So then I would recommend we take out the first word altercation, take out the or all the way to the comma, and have it read, for minor threats or altercations, comma, the employee shall intervene directly in the fight or address the safety threat if the employee can do so safely.
Yeah, I think that's better, because it just leaves a little more to the judgment of the person there.
Well, and sometimes, in my experience, we actually gave whistles to all our staff. Just, sometimes just blowing a whistle is enough to stop an altercation. So it doesn't have to be, as has already been said, it doesn't have to be jumping in the middle and refereeing a fight or breaking up a fight that way. It could just be blowing a whistle, and, the students stop and look at you, and, then you can break it up that way. So you can do it safely in a variety of ways.
And I think most of you know, I before I came to the school system, I worked at a wilderness program for at-risk and adjudicated youth. And I'll step back to, again, the more we can train our staff to build relationships with students, the less of these incidents you will have. Because the more that they are relationship driven, the more the students, one, will go to the adult if they need to, or two, I've seen kids stop a fight because they don't want a teacher involved or don't want a teacher injured. All right, Colin, are you good? Can we go to page 3, please? Top of the page. The second paragraph in number 3. If you look there, safety is spelled wrong. Sorry, I've got a couple of English majors up here when we were going through policy.
Yes. Oh my gosh. How did my eye miss that? I see it.
And then if we can go to page 4, please. Under 6, the third paragraph, where it reads, school officials shall investigate and act upon any report of such behavior, criminal activities to law enforcement. We want to insert the word immediately. This is a pressure point we want to work with our staff on, about making sure we're reporting these appropriately. And so immediately is the word we'd like to insert. That was all our recommendations on that policy.
Okay, so I have a few, if we can start at the beginning again in letter C. The first paragraph that we put in, definitely it's, you know, coming straight out of the North Carolina Occupational Safety and Health Act. And I was just the general duty clause. So I was just thinking that we should mention that so folks understand where that it's not just we recognize it and we think it's a good thing, it's required by law. And it's written in as a general duty clause. And McKenna did make a note of that in her correlation table, that is why that was inserted. So I think that merits a reference either in the text or in the body. I mean, or in the resources or references. Anybody got any thoughts on that?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and the general, it's 29 CFR 1910, you know, is where that comes from. So then we're looking at in the second paragraph of C, where it's talking about the second sentence, the principal, and I would say we need to add in there, or designee is required to inspect, you know, school buildings, playgrounds, you know, twice a month. And I would like to see inspect and document, because inspect doesn't necessarily, some people think it implies that you're documenting it, but if we were to ever have to, you know, present, you know, in court, you know, or to an OSHA compliance officer who comes to our school, then we would need to document that we are actually doing those inspections.
Eddie, is there a place where the custodians put their documentation?
Yes, there's we actually have a procedure and a checklist that the principal or their designee, who in most cases is the custodian, inspects playgrounds and school grounds on a daily basis. And that's a form that they fill out and submit back to the principal.
So do we need to include that as a cross-reference, you know, to another policy? Like, and listed at the end, like we have all the others?
Is that a policy, Eddie, or is that just a practice?
No, it's just
a practice.
It's just
The
a practice.
Okay, all right. I'm good with that. And so moving on down to the last paragraph in C, when it says, when necessary, proper signs indicating potential hazards or recommended safety precautions must be posted. When in actuality, I think that we should include in there that we put barriers in place where necessary to protect employees, students, and visitors from the potential hazard that we've identified. Just putting up a sign really doesn't mitigate the hazard, and it doesn't protect people from the hazard.
So what I'm assuming is a wet floor sign, and we put those up. If there's something that's completely shut down, like a bathroom or something that's locked and closed, no one has access to it. If there's a hole or something on our campus and they're doing some digging, that's also wrapped off with tape.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, a barrier, you know, some sort of physical, that's not a sign, that's a barrier.
But so what we do is, I want to make sure that with the policy is written and then we get to do the practice, because if it gets too specific and we forget to do something that's not, then we are held, I mean, we're held accountable to the policies, and I'm not trying to escape the policy, but there are things that we already have in place that I don't know. I mean, I just don't, I would have a hard time seeing that we don't create safety and warning signs when there are things that are going on in our building. I hadn't been made aware of anything. Eddie, are you aware of times that it needs to be more safe or more pronounced?
Well, I mean, again, we have practices in place, and if you read that paragraph in its entirety, I'm really wondering what that second sentence is referring to. You know, all warning systems must meet building and equipment codes as required by law and be properly maintained. We obviously do that. You know, the fire alarm system comes to mind, you know, when necessary. So is it referring back to warning systems? Because again, we have practices in place that if for some reason, you know, the fire alarm there's a issue with the fire alarm, it's not working correctly, then the principals have you know, procedures and practices in place to implement a fire watch. So there's a if it's referring back to warning systems, there's so many things that you know, it's not just a sign or a barricade. It could be, yeah, so many different things.
Well, a warning system, when we're talking about it there, it just says it must be maintained. So to me, that is something physical, like a fire alarm or those alarms that we have in staircases that where students and staff that need special assistance to get downstairs, you know, those alarms, the smoke detectors, any carbon monoxide detectors that we may have, that to me is what we mean by warning systems. And then, but all I'm saying is that if just because we think that we're doing it right, if something goes wrong and we haven't done it, then we can get fined. Maybe not for students, but for our adults on the campus. You know, that if we haven't made every effort to barricade off, you know, and it sounds like we do, but all I'm saying is if we do that, then we should, suggesting that proper signs and barricades as appropriate put out. Because
what about, you know, when necessary, proper steps should be taken to mitigate potential hazards?
Yeah, I mean, the mitigate them, but then suppose we can't do anything for it. The only thing we can do is put in we can't, administrative controls means that you can put on some safety glasses. Engineering controls means you can get rid of it. But if we can't get rid of it, we got to do something in the meantime. And the meantime might be just barricading it, you know,
but then we don't use it. So let's say if it's that bad, then we shut it down until it can be repaired. So if it's a building, an adjacent building, then we move students out of there so that we lock off places because it would be too detrimental for us that a student might slip into something. So it's locked off and we don't use it. If it gets to that level, and you know, then we're immediately calling in contractors to see what we need to do. But in the meantime, our custodians are gathering the advice from our facilities folks, what needs to happen. And like I said, then it becomes a building that's locked off when we move kids.
All right, well, I will let it, whatever everybody wants to do. I'm just telling you from a safety professional point of view what that really means in practice.
So, Mr. Wildeboer, any thoughts on that?
No, I thought, you know, like I say, I do understand Ms. Crable's concern. She's obviously the expert in this area, but you know, I think whatever the group as a whole wants to do.
Do we want to put this off and have more discussion on it, or are we comfortable with staff's recommendations? I'm personally comfortable with staff's recommendations, but it's up to the two of you.
Well, I'm not necessarily comfortable, but if that's what we want to do, then we just, and we have good, solid procedures in place, then that's what we'll count on.
I concur.
Okay, so moving then on to page 2, number
Ms.
1.
Grable,
Oh,
Ms. Grable, before you jump in on that, I just wanted to note, Mr. Wildebohr has to leave us at 10:45, so this seems like a good place for him to sneak out. But Mr. Wildebohr, I did want to wish
okay,
you
that's fine.
I wanted to wish you a safe and happy holiday.
Thank
If there's anything else, please text or let us know and we can bring it up.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. And I'd like to all, wish my best and Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone. Thank you very much for all your support, and hope you have a wonderful holiday. Thank you.
Thank you. Merry Christmas and happy holidays. All right, Ms. Grable, sorry about that. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were saying?
Yes, so on page 2, number 1, 1, 2, 3, the third paragraph, the last sentence, do we need to define or anything about only the degree of force or physical control reasonably necessary shall be used to reestablish a safe environment? Is that wording okay? Like, what is reasonably necessary to some is not reasonably necessary to others? We've seen a lot of that in the news.
So I agree. I think, and again, this is sort of where I come down on most of these issues, is there has to be we have to trust, we have to give some latitude to our professional educators and trust that they know and that they will be able to understand what is reasonable. I feel like the policy does that as worded. I would struggle to come up with different language here, but I'm certainly open.
I think it's important that it be in there. And Ms. Crable, that may be a place where we lean in with when we train our principals to train our teachers about this, to reference that specifically and help them learn what that would look like.
Yeah, no, I agree. It needs to be in there. And if we've got procedures and training, it kind of comes back to what you were talking about too, with all school system employees and volunteers will have the responsibility for supervising. And Dr. Faust said, that the level of supervision and the training that we do. So I just want to make sure that that's covered in procedures somewhere, that we have some training on what that means in a school, for, and who's allowed to do what physical level of restraint, or control, physical control.
So there's a difference between breaking up a fight and doing the 2-arm control or performing the CPI actual procedures. Like if I'm trying to break up a fight, I'm probably not going to use the CPI moves. It's grab and go or pulling apart, that type of thing. That's not in, because in CPI, it's a calm down part where you're trying to get them. That's the last thing that you're wanting to do is put your hands on a child. And that's what CPI teaches you. But if they're banging, they're fighting, you've got to get them separated. So that's different. And we share, but I can't put it all in policy of what the steps are, because each fight will look differently. There's sometimes where I may not, if I'm an administrator, I may only have to tell them stop, and I can walk in between them and say stop and go your ways. There may be a fight where it takes 3 of us to pull them apart, and then so it just depends. But I can't.
I'm okay
I
with
don't
that.
know, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, that I'm just hoping that we have procedures in place that cover that, training in place that covers that. That's all. In the next paragraph. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There's not a training that we teach individuals of how to break up a fight.
Okay. Common sense. And just like we said, for minor threats or altercations, just intervene and direct and separate as appropriate. Okay. So in the next paragraph, when we have response protocols established by the principal, do we need to say building administrator in there somewhere? Because are we only talking about kids who are fighting, or are we talking about workplace violence, or is that going to be covered in the workplace violence policy?
Can you share with me where you are, Ms. Crable? I'm sorry.
Oh, it's the last paragraph, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the in that first sentence, employees should take further action as appropriate in accordance with any response protocols. Like, let's say that this happens, on a field trip, or when we're at the Board of Education Center, or we're at the Spencer building, where the principal, is not there.
Does the designee cover that?
Or designee. I don't see a designee. Yeah, we can add or designee. And would this
So
be, I'm sorry.
But our handbook would also cover it. So if a student, let's say they're students and they get into an altercation and they're on a field trip, those same procedural items that are in our handbook, where whatever, I don't have the pages in front of me, but the investigation, because they're still on they're still school sponsored events, we still have the jurisdiction to follow the procedures as if they were in a classroom. And so that would take into account, I think that's what you're talking about. If they're away from, employees should take further action as appropriate in accordance. Of course, you would separate the students. Probably, it just depends on how large the infraction is of what would be needed.
So is this a place in this paragraph where, when it says such protocols, where we would refer to a school improvement plan or the safety plan that each school has?
If this one is still under like the fighting and the threats, you have to know what the school protocol is. Every school has a protocol for discipline. So you have, which is inside. So typically you have your rules that you follow for your school that are pulled out of these policies. And so the school principal, teacher, says whoever the administrator is, they will know what their school policies are. Or not just the policy, their school rules are. And so that's how I read that all employees are responsible for knowing and following such protocols to the fullest extent reasonable under the circumstances at the time. So if you are on a field trip and students get into a fight, what's the fullest extent reasonable under that circumstance at that time? What can you do at that time? And because you're not at home, when I say at home, you're not in your school building. So that's how that reads to me.
Okay. So is there anywhere that we need to include that these protocols have been established at each school and are included in their school improvement plan or their safety plan as part of the school improvement plan?
I don't know that all those protocols will be included in the school safety plan or the school improvement plan. I think individual principals might establish protocols that wouldn't necessarily be captured there. Is that right, Dr. Faust?
Well, I'm sorry, Dr. Faust.
Yes, that's what I would assume also. That's not captured there. That's different from your safety plan and your school improvement plan.
Because I had something called a school-wide discipline plan that laid out which infractions were to be dealt with in the classroom, what to do with unruly students. It was 3 pages that we went over as a staff. So most schools will develop a discipline plan generally.
And Ms. Crable, I would add the example of a high school football game, students from 2 different schools getting into a physical altercation. And in that case, I can't imagine that an individualized school safety plan or SIT item would address that. I think that really, how it's written here about when you require the assistance, you seek the assistance immediately by as many staff members who are available to address that, to reestablish control of the situation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so on page 3, in the first paragraph where it's talking about the responsibility of superintendent or designee to see that all employees are held accountable or informed of the state, local, and federal safety rules. Is this an appropriate place for designee to call out specifically our director of safety?
I would again see that in some places as the school principal informing his staff of those things as well. So I don't know if designee just gives Dr. Faust sort of the flexibility to determine which area the person should be in, if that makes sense. Like in the case of my staff, it will be my responsibility to make sure my staff are informed of these things. In a school building, it might be the principal to do that. I don't know, Dr. Faust, do you did disagree or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think designee would capture if it's a time where there's a safety individual who's training versus a principal who's training versus a supervisor who is doing training. I think we would capture it there. Or it could be the school board attorney.
Okay, and I'm not really talking about training. I'm just talking about keeping them up to date on the rules. But okay,
right.
That's fine.
So I mean, I think that would capture it too. I mean, the training versus the newly updated laws, procedures, all of those things. I just think that that designee would.
And so we would cover in procedure how the information gets from the safety director and attorney down to the level that it needs to be at. Is that what we're saying?
Well, sometimes we determine, and so for instance, like we've had the board attorney come to principals meetings and give presentations. And so then after the board attorney gives the presentation, it's the expectation of the principals go back to their buildings, implement, share that information. Or directors, there are directors that are there too.
And conduct all the training and get all the training records to the safety office.
If that's needed, yes.
Okay. Okay, in the second paragraph, when we're talking about the safety training here, we don't mention anything in there about the anonymous safety tip line. Do we need to mention anything about social media, in there about some of the emergency situations, or we want to keep that generic as well?
The ethics 360 and some of our other stuff comes up later on, so I didn't put it specifically here because I think that anonymous safety tip line is that. But we can certainly. Are you saying that if we hear about something on social media as well?
Yeah, because I have it under number 6 too, where it says reporting risks, where we're talking about, how to report them through the anonymous tip safety line. The anonymous safety tip line, I thought we were going through that we were trying to get people to report, not repost, kind of policy or procedure. So I was just thinking about when it says the behavior, information, and related indicators that warn of impending problems, that, social media seems to be one of our big warning things these days. So maybe it's best just to be under number 6.
I think it also is covered in, I would think, and Colin, you can speak to this, but staff should be able to recognize and respond to behavior information and indicators that warn of impending problems. Facebook back in the day, now Instagram or whatever, is one of the ways that we did that. We would hear information that comes from a social media site and that would warn us of impending problems.
So information would be, social media would be included under information.
I would think it relates.
I would
Colin,
agree. Yeah, I would agree. I think that includes social media, Snapchat, things of that nature.
All that. Okay.
it used
And
to be
then
notes
under
passed in
emergency,
class.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it used to be notes passed in class when I was in
Yes,
school.
yes, it's notes. You're right. So in under is reunification procedures included under the variety of emergency situations?
Can you share with me where you are?
It's in the same, it's in the same paragraph. Safety training must include detailed instruction on how to respond to a variety of emergency situations. Are we including reunification procedures as part of emergency situations?
See, I read that. I used to have like a flip chart in when I was principal, and it had like gas leak, bomb threat, all these different scenarios that could happen and the response pattern for each fire. I didn't think about reunification as an emergency situation per se, but it certainly can be. I don't know.
Well, it's a response to an emergency some emergency situations.
True.
So if we're
hi, it's Julie. I just joined back on. I was in a different meeting. Not by accident, on purpose, but I'm back. So sounded like I didn't know where I was supposed to be. We do include that in the individual school plans, and the state has the Center for Safer Schools at the state level has provided a newer protocol, and so we're moving through that training through Glenn Locklear, and it's included in the school specific safety plans.
Okay. So yeah, so I guess that came back to my last question too about where do we talk about in this policy? Where's the right place to talk about that we require school safety plans as part of a school improvement plan? I didn't really see that in there anywhere. And does anybody think that it's important to include that? Because if that's how we're handling it at the lowest level, one of our other policies says handle things at the lowest level possible. And if the lowest level possible is at the school, and we never bring it to the attention that we have, safety plans and safety protocols at the school, and maybe it's covered someplace else and I'm just not seeing it.
I think the place, if we're going to put it anywhere, I think it would be best put in number 5, because reunification would be a part of planning for emergencies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Because
and when it talks about, go ahead.
Yeah, it talks about diagrams and what we used to call the black box in our building.
It's a Knox box, but that the fire department requires that we have.
Right. When I was a principal, you had to keep one in your car and one in the principal's office for some reason. But that would be where I would put unification plans in, because it's a part of responding to emergencies. Okay.
So are we in that number 5 when it says that the board will adopt a school risk management plan? Is that what is our emergency operation plan, what we're talking about in this policy? The school risk management plan and the emergency operation plan, are they the same?
Julie, can you speak to that? I haven't seen the school's individual plans.
I'm going to ask Eddie if he'll jump in here.
I think it is, because when you read the rest of the paragraph, that these are the things that we do as part of our emergency operation plan. So yeah, I think maybe we just change, the school risk management plan to a emergency operation plan.
That's kind of what I was getting at, to use terminology in our policy that is indicative of what we're doing.
And Eddie, principals did submit this plan to Glenn this year, but I'm not sure what it was called. exactly. But they were required a couple of months ago to make sure that plan was submitted.
But that name, that plan, the name of that plan would not be different from what the emergency management folks are looking for. I don't want us to have to call in two different things. So, and we have what they need. It's like, but they're calling it something else. Like, well, we don't have that. So I think we would want to be consistent with whatever the state is calling it, so that that translates.
Right. That's what I'm getting at, is let's call in our policy what we're calling it. If we don't want to call if we want to call our emergency operation plan our school risk management plan or our district risk management plan, then let's pick one or the other. I don't think we should have both, unless, because sometimes risk management refers to, insurance and that kind of stuff. And risk management in a work environment is basically your emergency operation plan. But if you read farther down, it says it requests for the school risk management plan and updated emergency response information when such updates are made. So that almost led me to believe like we were talking about two different things, but when you continue to read down what they're talking about with the schematic diagrams, and then later on when in another policy where we're talking about lists of chemicals, I think we're talking about emergency operation plans.
That is what we call it. And I don't know if, I know there's a legislative requirement that we provide those plans to the Department of Public Safety, Emergency Management. I don't know if the specific language references school risk management plan. That may be why it's written like that. But we do call it our emergency operation plan, and they're one and the same. So for consistency with within our school system and what everyone is used to hearing, it's the emergency operation plan. There's a district level and then individual schools.
Right. So I guess we need to just either get clarification. Do we have to call it the risk management plan? Just like with Title IX, we have to call him the Title IX coordinator, in all of our policy, but that might not be what we call them, in actuality. So I was just, if there's a statute that says we got to call it that, then we need to at least define that, like what we did with Mary Hazel, that the school finance officer is entitled chief financial officer. So I think we need, if they're the same and we need to have school risk management words, then we need to define that so that people are clear when they're looking at our policy, what we're talking about.
Can we scroll down to the statutory references at the bottom of the policy?
Yeah.
So I can look those up. Okay, that's good. Thanks.
I didn't go to the link where it said other resources.
Can you scroll back up? Sorry. All right. And the language again was school risk. What was the exact phrasing? School risk.
It says in this policy, we'll adopt a school risk management plan relating to incidents of school violence for each school and in the school system. So this one's really only talking that says school violence, but the other things in the rest of that paragraph, it's talking about more than just school violence. So maybe we need to research this one a little bit more, since it is 11 o'clock.
I'm fine, Eddie and Julian. If we want to wrap around that with Colin, we can certainly look deeper into that if we want to.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. My only question is, are we gonna? I mean, are we gonna? I mean, we're already in. So you know, I really want to make sure that we get this policy. I don't want to come back next month because I'm sure it'll take a while, no matter when we discuss it. So if there's a way we can finish it, I'd really love to do it.
Maybe let me look for a moment. We can circle back.
And Colin, I think, I mean, I agree with Ms. Craybill that it for consistency within our school district, it would be nice if it was labeled School Emergency Operation Plan. That's what everyone's familiar with. Just want to make sure that that doesn't conflict with any statutory requirements.
That's my concern as well.
Okay, so what I recommend then is let's move on to the next policy. And then after we finish that, we'll circle back and try to wrap this one up. Okay, so we'll put that on hold for a minute. Our next policy up for discussion is policy 1710-4020-7230, discrimination and harassment prohibited by federal law. And I will begin with our attorney. I guess this is, I know this is one we've discussed before, but please, Mr. Shive, lead us on.
So these policies were revised in light of the new Title IX regulations. And so this particular policy applies to students and employees, and particularly addresses federal law, Title VII, Title IX, or sorry, Title VII, not Title IX. And so these policies are separated out. So previously there was one bullying and harassment complaint policy that applied to everything, but now because of the new Title IX regulations, it's been separated out. So this policy will note, if you scroll down a little bit, that it does not apply to complaints of sexual harassment around Title IX. It does not apply to disability discrimination issues with respect to students. So this is your kind of discrimination based on race, gender, etc. Those things that are covered under Title VII.
Okay, thank you, Irma. So they're separated. I do want to clarify for anybody watching, these policies are just separated. They're not, we still have our federally mandated Title IX policies and disability policies, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Ms. Crable, did you have anything here? I did not. Again, with federal law, I don't usually add much, or state law, but did you have anything here?
I did actually. So I have a question is, in the first paragraph, do we not need to say in the list of the board prohibits discrimination based on all these things, do we not need to list gender identity in there, or is that covered under one of the Title IX policies?
That's covered under sex, actually.
Okay. All right. So
I asked that same question.
So we'll get to that, because I remember reading in McKenna's notes that we had sex under the umbrella with, parenting and pregnancy and all that stuff. Another question is, why do we have to call out in our policy the Boy Scouts?
I asked that too.
Yeah, there's an equal access. There's a federal law that provides equal access with respect to Boy Scouts. It's kind of a very specific thing, but that is a federal law.
And so we're not concerned that if we're talking about discrimination, that we're not calling out the Girl Scouts as well?
That again, so that's a particular statute. I think that we could. I think that other districts might have altered that language a little bit, but we are. The law applies to Boy Scouts. So that's what the law is.
Can we add Girl Scouts? I'm just having a hard time when we're talking about discrimination when we're only talking about one.
Yeah, let me look to other districts that have changed that language a little bit, because I know that's always comes up as a topic of confusion. And so let me look at how we phrase that elsewhere.
But
Well, I mean,
Colin, it is a weird federal law that specifies Boy Scouts specifically, isn't it?
Yes.
and even given with all the scrutiny and the changes in the Boy Scouts of late, do we still have to include it? Because I mean, they're supposed to be allowing girls now, and Girl Scouts allow boys. So it just seems that they, with all the difference, I mean, but I'm not going to dispute the law. I mean, obviously, if we have to have it, it just doesn't quite make sense with all the changes within the Boy Scouts themselves that we still have to include that here.
Well, one question, Colin, is if the last word says as required by law, we wouldn't necessarily need to reference the Boy Scouts specifically because that is required by law.
Yeah, I think you could, again, I think that's how we phrased it other places where boards just didn't like the way it sounded. I think we might have said just will provide equal access to other designated youth groups as required by law. I think that's
If
where
we
we
can
need to go.
say that, I would prefer to say that.
It does stick out like a sore thumb, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah, definitely in agreement. Wouldn't be the first thing I've seen from the federal government that didn't make a lot of sense. And I say that as somebody who really likes the federal government. But yeah, that's kind of I agree. Anything we can do to sort of make that language a bit more palatable is something we should do.
So in this policy where we talked about way back in 3620, the extracurricular activities, where we were talking about transgender students, doesn't this, is it this policy or the Title IX policy that directly, it says that forms of discrimination? So if we didn't allow those students to participate in sports, then we would be violating one of our own policies. Am I reading that correctly?
I'm not sure what your question is.
So I'm just looking for, a lot of people are still upset with, the reasoning behind 3620 and allowing transgender students in middle school to play sports. And if I'm reading through this one and the other discrimination ones, if we didn't allow that, then we would be discriminating. Is that right?
Yeah. So federal law now, under Title IX and Title VII, discriminating against a transgender person violates federal law. That's right.
Okay, so I just so that we know that we're clear, we have to, our policies all have to support each other. You can't say it in one place and not say it in another. Right? Okay.
Right.
Okay. So then when we're talking about prohibited, so on page 2, letter A, we're talking about visitors, school, under A, students, school system employees, volunteers, and visitors are expected to behave in a civil and respectful manner. Where it says visitors can be included as members of the community. Does this sort of apply to community members at Board of Education meetings when they come and they are not civil and not respectful? That we prohibit that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and the board, has adopted rules of decorum for its board meetings, and if someone is interrupting the meeting or otherwise engaging in behavior that would violate our policy, then we can ask them to leave, and then we have done that in the past.
Right. So that's where this is the policy and the federal law that we can report. I mean, that we can refer to when people question the fact that they're being asked to leave. Is that?
Well, actually, no. More specifically, the state law on board meetings and allows us to ask folks to leave the meeting if they are being disruptive. So there's a specific state law that authorizes that, separate from this policy.
Okay. So on page 3, when we're talking about in the first paragraph.
Ms. Greenwood, can I speak to something in that section?
I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Can I just speak to real quick on something
You
in
may.
that section? Colin, on the first page, it talks about all the different types of discrimination, and on this section here, it leaves out sex and age. The legally protected classes are race, color, national origin, religion, and disability. It doesn't include sex and age.
It did say at the top in the first paragraph.
It says in the top of the first paragraph and then drops the two of them in this paragraph.
Gotcha. Okay.
Is there a reason, or is that just a mistake?
I don't know. Can you scroll back up to the first page?
It's addressed there in the first paragraph. It lists all the discrimination.
Okay, so
see, sex and age are listed there, but they're not listed in the subsection.
okay. I think that so it references the Title IX policy, which would prohibit discrimination, harassment on the basis of sex. So I guess that's that's covered separately under Title IX. And then age would be under policy 7232. So those are addressed in separate policies. So this policy is only applying to race, color, national origin.
Then why is it listed in the top?
It's just that is more of a kind of a prefatory kind of statement about the board's anti-discrimination policy.
Okay, that just struck me as strange. And since I've cleared the over 40 by a couple of touchdowns, I was curious.
Well, and we do include all those in the legal references and the cross references, so it does seem like if it doesn't need to be there, then the other policies we talk about, if it doesn't need to be there, then we take it out. And if our cross references, I always get called down on we can't cross reference everything, but yet we are in this one, but we're not really talking about it.
Well, again, and I obviously didn't draft this policy, but I think that the first paragraph, it's just trying to say this is the board's anti-discrimination, stance in general. And then below that, it's saying these are all the different policies where different types of discrimination are addressed. This particular policy applies to race, color, national origin.
Okay.
Okay. So page 3, in the first paragraph, it says the last sentence where it says harassment may occur through electronic means such as through the internet, email, and text. So is internet again social media? And I want to make sure, because that seems to be a focus, in our community and within our school system on trying to, kind of get that under control. So should we not specifically call that out, or does internet mean social media? Because to me, internet means email.
Well, no, I think so. It says, first of all, it says such as, so it's not an exhaustive list. It's just kind of an illustrative list. And it also says internet separate from email. It says internet, then email or text message. So I think it definitely includes social media.
Does anybody else feel the need to call that out specifically?
There's certainly no harm in including it.
There is no harm in including it, and it's just such as list, so there's no reason you can't put another one in there.
I would like to put it in there just so that we keep our eye on the prize, that the or not prize, but we keep our eye on one of the things that is clearly plaguing us, at this point in time.
But I wouldn't take out internet, Colin. I would maybe.
No, I wouldn't either. Yeah. Okay. Jarell already answered this question for me, that civil rights coordinator is not the same as the Title IX coordinator, correct?
That's right.
Okay, because we have like 3 different civil rights coordinators. And then when we're talking about our senior human resources official, is that Dr. Barnes?
Where does it say that?
Well, it's letter C, number 1, the little paragraph at the after C. And it's included in several other places. What says, if written complaint alleges that the perpetrator is an employee, the school official receiving the complaint shall notify the senior human resources official.
Colin, I wonder if you could take the out and use a, because sometimes it goes to Jarrell and sometimes it comes to me, who I then turn over to Jarrell.
Yeah, it could either that or it could say senior human resources official or designee, either way.
I'm fine either way.
I'm fine either way.
Okay, let's say or designee.
So it's the or designee. Okay.
Stephanie, could I go back and Ms. Crable, could I go back
Yes.
and reference something you spoke to earlier as well?
Sure.
On page 3 of 10, I just think it's important to call out. Often you hear that didn't happen on school grounds, so it's not applicable to the school. I think
You mean like letter number 3?
Number 3, letter
Yeah.
6. That's not a letter. Number 6 speaks to if it impacts on the school environment, then it can be addressed by the school. So I think it's important to note that even if it didn't happen on school grounds, it affects the maintaining order and discipline in the school. That does put the onus back to the principal as well. And
we heard a little bit about that, Dr. Barnes, at the law conference for the school boards associations, and we went through case law where sometimes that was upheld and sometimes it wasn't. But we clearly talked about that, like at our Title IX committee meetings, where it could be happening, an assault or harassment could be happening at home in the neighborhood, but yet so that's not applicable to school. But then when you come to school and you're in the same classroom and it continues, then it does affect the school climate. So that was one of those ones that, and Colin can maybe speak to this, but it was just clearly in the middle. And we went through several case studies where it counted sometimes and it didn't count sometimes. And we non-lay people were just like, holy smokes, glad we have legal counsel.
Yeah. It is a shifting area of the law. There's a recent Supreme Court case that addressed off-campus student speech. And the more that the off-campus student speech is directed and harassing to a particular individual student or threatening to a staff member, the more likely it is that we're going to be able to address it. But it's kind of a sliding scale type situation, and you can't really define it. Clearly, it's you have to look at the facts and circumstances of each case.
Yeah, that's what we found. That's what we learned at that training. That's why I didn't bring that one up, because I already asked that question, in public before. So, okay. So then moving through the same thing, the last sentence on page 4, which says a written complaint alleging that a person who is not a student or employee has been discriminated against or harassed. Who might that be? Like, are we talking about, a Board of Education member? Are we talking about a person who comes into the school, like, I'm allowed in because I have dark hair, but you're not allowed in because you're from Virginia, or something like that? Is that what that means?
It could be a volunteer, for instance, or a parent, I guess. And that, because it's not a student or an employee, there's not really a process for them. It's just kind of a generic complaint that would be submitted to the administration of the board. There's no right to a hearing or anything like that. It's just a complaint.
Okay.
I would see this as someone who applied for a job and didn't get one, and is claiming.
Oh, okay.
I mean, because that would fall under this as well.
So all they can do is just file, and they would file a complaint where it just says that there's no process for resolving the complaint, but you're welcome to file one.
Yeah, it's kind of, you file a complaint and then perhaps, the board receives it and is concerned about it and asks administration to look into it, or perhaps administration gets the complaint and, then wants to investigate it and might decide to take some action because of it.
Okay. Okay. So in letter D, where it says school officials' response to reports of the complaints, where it says principal or designee or site supervisor. I think in the past for site supervisor, we called it building administrator. When we're talking about buildings like central office or the technology building, does that matter?
I don't have an opinion about that. I don't know if administration would
The only
prefer.
place I think I would almost take out the word site, because if a complaint is made by someone in the transportation department, that director or supervisor would need to investigate.
Right.
So I think we want to make sure we encompass central office departments in that policy somehow. So you might want to say supervisor or director or something like that.
Yeah, that's kind of that's what we talked about in previous ones, where we're talking about places that are not schools where these incidents could still occur. So just call it a supervisor, building supervisor, department supervisor, or just supervisor.
I would just say supervisor, because building is sort of, there's a whole bunch of us crammed into this building.
Okay. So then when in that same sentence where it says the principal or designee or supervisor will be the investigator when an alleged perpetrator is a student or third party. So I thought we weren't investigating at the school level, that we get a complaint and it comes through the Title IX office, or it comes through the civil rights coordinator office, or that we handle these things at the central office level and not at the school level.
Usually it depends on the severity. Colin, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's exactly right. And I think that then the last sentence of that paragraph, the superintendent may determine that individual circumstances warrant the assignment of a different investigator. So basically, administration can look at it, and if it's not that severe, then it's investigated at the school level. If it's more severe, then central office takes over.
Well, I'm thinking about some principals may think it's severe, and some principals may think I can handle this with a hand smack, and then it turns into much, much more. So I was just under the impression, and that maybe I'm wrong, is that we had all complaints come through one location in the central office, and then the central office decided who did the investigating. Because obviously, if it's happening at a school, the principal has to be involved, but the principal doesn't have to be the lead investigator.
So I can speak to some of this. This is Gerald speaking here. Okay. So when we get reports of bullying, harassment, discrimination, and a student responded, meaning the student was accused, that will go back down to the school level, unless it is sexual in nature, which then makes it a Title IX report. And then Title IX specifically states that the investigator must be adequately trained, the training that you all received as board members. They have to go through a similar training. So for Title IX specific reports against students, that training has only been provided to John, myself, and the investigators in central office. So that's that distinction when it's a student that's accused. Otherwise, it would be kicked back down to the school level. When it's an employee that's accused, it comes to central office.
So I guess what I'm trying to establish is how do we monitor that the principal or designee or supervisor is making appropriate investigative decisions?
I think that's
So
what
I
HR,
can go ahead, Colin.
No, I was gonna say, I think that's what HR does all the time. But I mean, it's, Dr. Barnes and his staff, I mean, I think that they're constantly monitoring, and if we feel that a school principal is not making the correct decision, that's addressed. But
And that's actually one of the things I think I may have spoke about this earlier, that we're looking, I'm actually talking to principals day after tomorrow about sort of when to call HR, that there are things that are normal school level incidents, there are things that are automatic HR things, and there are things in the middle, and sort of working with them to help determine when do you call us to get guidance versus when do you address these issues yourself. And so we're actually working to help the principals understand which level is which, if that makes sense.
Yes, and then so do we monitor that? Is there a log of some sort where the principal talks about, I mean, the principal says, I investigated Miss Craybill this way, and I handled it here. I investigated, person B. I started it and went, this was out of my lane, so I reported it up. I mean, are we keeping track at that level? I don't want to put it in policy. I'm just asking that
Yes.
question.
Yes. A principal will call me and say, hey, I have this incident. I'll give her guidance, and then I'll say, follow up with me afterwards and let me know if there are documents issued. We're reviewing those before they go to the employee. All that stuff is being put sort of in that case.
And with regard to student situations, if it's bullying, harassment, discrimination, other than a Title IX incident, those have to be reported through Ethics 360, which gives us that log and that investigation protocol. And when those come through Jarrell's office, he will tag whoever needs to be listed as like an enterprise case manager. But then the school level staff are included, and then they are listed as the investigators, and then we can all see those cases, so we can follow through and monitor, and if there are any questions, we can always go in and search them. And then with regard to confirmed bullying or substantiated bullying, then there's a district level investigation that goes into that to support with problem solving. Okay.
Piggyback on that. Actually, tomorrow we are at the principals meeting. We're actually doing some training on that protocol again with principals. So
yeah, and it's a retraining.
Yes, a retraining. I'm sorry. Yes, they have heard the information before.
And Ms. Craybill, just so that you're aware, the way the system is set up in Ethics 360, if the principal asks me to do the investigation, I can't just close out the case. She still has to sign off on that. It still has to go through those levels of clearance for it to get closure. So it's not several hands and eyes have to track it.
So do assistant principals get the same training as the principals, since they oftentimes are the designee, especially if the principal is out of the building, either for a short period of time or an extended period of time? Do the APs get the same level of training so they feel competent?
I've been trained on how to complete an Ethics 360 investigation and putting it in the system, how to do the investigation. I can speak for my generation of AP training. I can't speak for what has happened since I became an AP, but yes. Mm-hmm.
And we are revamping our AP training, and two of their mandatory sessions for the spring semester. One is about discipline with employees, and one is about reporting procedures. So they will all hear that again in the spring.
Okay. And I'm only asking these questions, like these ones, so pointedly because we had a problem in the past. And I just want to make sure that we are really clear on, things getting reported timely, that need to be reported timely, so that we don't get caught up in bad stuff, piling on top of each other before we have a chance to get to it.
Oh, very much so. And that's one of the reasons that we're sort of reintroducing some of these trainings, because we saw that as a pressure point too. Okay.
So that like feeds into on page 6, number 2, where it talks about the investigator if the investigator's findings. If the investigator finds that a harassment has occurred and created a hostile environment, the investigator shall assign or recommend appropriate disciplinary action. So are we assuming that that means that if the investigator's the principal gets to assign. I'm just worried that people that who shouldn't be assigning discipline are given the carte blanche to assign discipline. So does that kind of mean that if the investigator is the principal, they can go ahead and deal with it?
If it's the investigators, the principal will be the investigator if it's a student. And so the principal can assign discipline to a student.
Right.
If it's an employee that we're talking about, the investigator is going to be HR, and then HR would assign discipline.
Okay, so HR can can determine what's appropriate. Yeah,
Yes.
I didn't mean that. You could just make it up. Okay. All right. So yeah, the last thing was just down on the letter G, the last sentence where it said on the internet. Can we add social media there too when we're talking about training programs? It says as funds are available, blah, 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 blah. And number 3, it says, train employees to be alert to locations as to where behaviors may occur, school buildings, school bus, cell phones, on the internet. And can we put social media there as well?
Yep, got it.
Thank you for indulging me on that one, you guys. This is one of those ones that it just makes me nervous. And I know it's the second go round, but everything, laws are changing.
Right.
Nelson,
Okay,
I'm done.
so we will move policy 1510 4-4200-7270 on as amended for first reading.
Did no, wait a minute. That was one you set aside that we didn't finish going back to.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, wait.
The one we just did was.
Yes, I'm sorry. 1710-4020 and 7230 on for first reading as amended.
Yes.
Okay. So it is 11:36. Let's go back briefly if we could. Colin, do you have anything with regards to 1510 school safety? I do not really know if we have enough time to begin our next policy, which is Title IX discrimination.
It looks like, and Eddie sent me something. It looks like that the school risk management plan that's language from statute. I think that's what we were trying to track down.
So if that's from do we need to look up and see what the definition of that in this, to make sure that if we say school risk management plan equals, or we call it emergency operations plan, that we're not calling it that erroneously?
Well, I can tell you that in working with the State Department of Emergency Management, they have a school emergency response application, and we provide information to them. And the information we provide is our school emergency operation plan. So I think I think what we call it is fine. They have accepted that, but for if we want to be consistent, with the general statute, just in how they refer to it, then we probably need to change our EOP to a school risk management plan.
Or we can put it in parentheses after school risk management plan, emergency operations plan. I mean, whatever's easiest for people to understand, because we've been calling it an emergency operation plan forever. As long as everybody understands, but I just think that we should only have one name. So
I agree with you. I'm all about consistency, and I do fear that if we were to change that language, it would cause some confusion. So, if it's okay to put in parentheses the school emergency operation plan, I think that would be sufficient.
Can we do that, Colin?
Makes sense to me.
Okay, then let's do that, because I think we should be consistent. So the one question around this school safety policy, when we talk about when we talk about school, does that encompass all district buildings and campuses, or is that just referring to schools?
Can we go back to that policy?
Cam, are you still there? Can you put us back on policy 1510? Thank you. Yeah, so it's just, when we talk about schools, I just want to know, like, are we talking about school buildings, or are we talk schools themselves, or any district building and campus?
Can you scroll down a little bit? I guess I don't, where is it, Ms. Craybill, that it references just schools and doesn't say more
Well,
broadly?
Throughout the whole thing, what we're talking about, it looks to me like we're talking about schools. And so when it talks about, just anything where we see a hazard, where we do this, a building principal, we're really only talking about principals in schools. And so, but there are safety hazards that occur or can occur, or safety requirements that can occur in all of our district buildings. So I just didn't know if we, like, when we have conducting drills, and we're talking about a school risk management plan, each building should have their own semi emergency action plans. They have different evacuation plans, they have different protocols. So, but it doesn't really address that. It just only talks about schools and where there are students.
Yeah, I mean, and Eddie might want to weigh in on this as well, but I think that, some of these requirements are particular to school buildings and things with principals that, that principals have to do, as set forth in statute. And so I don't know,
let me give you a specific example that really comes to light. If we're looking on page 3, it's in the 1, 2, 3rd paragraph. So it says, and Chris, Dr. Barnes gave this example too. School personnel must teach and review with students safety procedures, including fire procedures, precautions for handling chemicals and potentially dangerous equipment, appropriate responses to threats to school safety. And it talks about middle schools having this tip. So if we're only talking, what about the school personnel that have to review these with adults in the building, or have to review them with bus drivers or maintenance people that aren't in a school building? They have their own specific safety procedures and fire procedures. We don't talk about our other employees. We're only talking about employees that work with students, and safety is all encompassing. And in fact, OSHA doesn't cover students, but OSHA does cover employees. So, we're missing out on a large population of people if we're not addressing those.
And I don't know is there a separate policy, Eddie, that addresses other school buildings?
Not that I'm aware of. I know we do all these things. Each facility has its own emergency operation plan, and we do these things, but I don't know that it's addressed separately.
I would just like to see us have a paragraph that talks about, when it says safety of school buildings and grounds, that maybe there's just like a 1 and a 2 in that section where we already have a 1 and a 2, but nowhere in here are we addressing specifically adults training adults having safety procedures. And that is where our district could be liable if we do not have appropriate safety procedures in place to protect our employees. And all of our school system employees are employees. We're going to talk later about, hazardous chemicals in labs, but there are hazardous chemicals that employees could be exposed to, elsewhere, as an example, and safety equipment that they can be, exposed to, as an example.
Helen, are the general statutes specifically designed to look at student impact in this area, and that's why it's not talking about other buildings?
Yeah, I think that some of the requirements here are codified with respect to students in particular. We certainly could add a paragraph talking about the steps that we take with respect to our other buildings. I would need administration's help with crafting that.
Because if you look, Colin, on letter C, that what was inserted, the blue, the board recognizes its duty to provide each of its employees with a workplace free from recognized hazards. I mean, McKenna made a point to say that we added that to the State School Board Association, and because that is the general duty clause that talks about safety for employees. And nowhere in our policy do we really address safety for employees. We're really focusing on safety for students, which is good and important, but we also have 4,000 employees that we have to also provide a good safety program for.
Yeah, so again, I think we could add just a paragraph there.
In there somewhere, yeah.
See.
Would I think I know the answer, but would it make sense to maybe in the first paragraph to say, for purposes of this policy, school building and school building principal shall also include, school administrative facilities and building administrators?
I'm okay with that because
Do we? I guess the only question then is, do we do each of these things at like all of our buildings?
We should.
Everything that's in this policy?
Everything that's not specifically referring to students.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, if that's the case, then we can just change to the wording or insert that definition at the front.
Yeah, Dr. Barnes had us to ask add this where he says every school must ensure that the following safety measures are met. So maybe that's where we can do some inserting there too, because every district, every school and district campus or district building, they're all responsible for doing that. If they don't have students, then they obviously don't follow the student rules. But if they just have adults, then they have to still follow them.
Right.
So I'm looking at this policy after what was just said and looking at the supervision of visitors piece. I'm just thinking of this complex. So I would need to look at policy 5020 to see what it says before I say, yeah, I'm with you guys that we do all this stuff.
I think it's worth a look at, because especially when we get to the policy somewhere on workplace violence, because that's going to be some safety procedures that they're not going to apply to students if we don't have students, but they're going to apply to adults. And bloodborne pathogens, the same way. That's going to apply, in a lot of in buildings where there are no students. So what do we want to do? PR tells me that when there's uncomfortable silence, don't talk. So
That's what I was doing.
yeah, everyone was practicing their good good communication skills. So
well, it's 11:50. I don't know if there's a consensus. Maybe we'll have to let Mr. Wildeboer move in on this, but I will certainly talk to staff over the next month. I urge everybody to, so we can sort of move this one forward.
I'm not comfortable moving it forward for a first reading until we have something. There's a lot of things that we've added.
So
I will. When we get to the HR, because there's some things that have to take place in the HR series before we actually do evaluations.
Okay, so do we want to just get to those right now? Like skip?
No, not at 11:50. I don't think we could get through one more policy. Let's leave. Could you make a note, Ms. Joy, about 1510 not being ready for first reading, and we're not taking any action on that today? That's going to be held in committee.
And I think we can have some more conversation about that, and and whether it's some verbiage change, a new paragraph. Let's make sure that we're doing all the things that are in that policy, and we could bring back a recommendation at your next meeting.
Yeah. So who takes, since safety is kind of in several different people's departments, who takes the lead on that?
Well, I think I can work with. I'm sorry, what?
I was going to say it depends on what it's speaking about in the department. We work collaboratively, so it's not like we have to just assign one person. Everyone is responsible for their policies that they are overseeing. When we have questions, we bring it to the table for the senior staff.
So, but what I guess my question was, if people looks at it from their own perspective, where do they send their comments for inclusion so we can look at? Do they send them to Colin so that he can incorporate them for one big thing for us to all relook at, or how that's what I'm talking about?
That's fine. That works.
Is that okay, Colin, now that I've signed you up for another task?
Absolutely. Happy to do that.
So Nelson, before you move us out, we do have 8 minutes. Charles, I thought I heard you say that there are some important ones that might be quick that we need to do so that we can move on with something.
No, it's going to take that series. Like, we've got to get through that HR series.
Yes.
And we were holding off until Chris came, but we've got to get through that series.
Do we need to have another meeting before we we get out for Christmas, or no?
No.
There's not that many left, actually. I mean, I think we can get through them next time.
No, we can wait. I don't know if they're coming up next time. My folks will actually tar and feather me if I put them in another meeting when we get out.
Okay, no, I'm cool with that. I don't want one either. I didn't know if there was not emergency one that had implication for something that is on your plate right this minute. That's what I was asking.
No, the only thing, a couple of things, is there's some real questions and some overhaul. We want to talk about teacher contracts.
Yes.
Which obviously has to be done in a timely manner. There are a couple of policies that I'm looking specifically to reteach principals, assistant principals, and send out to all staff to review. And that's staff-student relations and things like that. So as long as we get them early in January, I can still hit those timelines.
There's not that many left. Well, there's not that many left. I think we can get through those in one
I just looking through them, I think they're going to take some considerable time. But no, there's not that many left. But just my hunch is that these will take some time. But we do need to get through them because our current policies are old, they're outdated, which is why we're doing this, and almost done. But with the hour fast approaching and nigh upon us, I will entertain a motion to adopt policy 8341 without changes.
So moved.
And I will second. Ms. Crable, how do you vote?
Aye.
And I also vote aye. So
Nelson, why
policy.
don't you just make the motion on the next one? You make the motion,
Okay.
I'll second it.
Cool. So I will move that policies 6430, 6450, 6510, 7360, 9120, 8350, 8410, 8510, 8520, 8530, and 1710 are moved forward for first reading with the changes made.
I think you skipped 8340. Does
Did
anybody, I wrote that down as moving forward with changes. Did anybody else do that?
Let's see.
It was the one about insurance.
8340 insurance. Okay, sorry. Yes, 8340 as well.
I second that motion.
Okay, Ms. Crable, how do you vote?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Those policies will be moved for first reading with the changes made. Do we need a vote on? I'll also move to hold 1510 in committee.
Correct.
Okay. Do you second?
Yeah, I didn't think we voted on those. I thought we
No,
just.
I didn't. Yeah, we don't need to vote on it.
Just make a
Okay,
note
that's fine.
of that
Yep,
we're doing it.
1510 will be held in committee.
Yeah, and so each department, because it says the reason, so each department can review for accuracy with
Okay.
non-student buildings.
Okay, excellent. Well, I really hope staff, I know you guys are on the call. I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas. Your work is appreciated year round, but especially at this time of year. So thank you very much. Everybody, please be safe. Enjoy some time with loved ones. And we will see you all again at our next policy committee meeting in 2022.
Thank you.
Yes. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Oh, yes, motion to adjourn.
And I will second. Ms. Crable, how do you vote?
Aye, yes.
I vote yes. Everybody have a wonderful day. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.